You're listening to Musical Talk at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Four-star cabaret jazz bar, 7 o'clock.
Hello and welcome to Musical Talk at the Edinburgh Fringe 2011. I'm Thos and if you haven't got that by now, really, perhaps you ought to start taking notes. And this is the very last episode of Musical Talk for this year, where we're going to be talking about the variety of shows which were on at the biggest arts festival in the world. Myself and David Kingsmill met up on several occasions to talk about shows we'd seen together and shows we'd seen apart. And for the most part, that's what you're going to hear in today's episode. But we'll also be talking to James Lark about Musical Talk's Pick of the Fringe. His musical, based on the short stories of Saki, the famous Edwardian writer, who was actually H.H. Munro, and turned into the fantastic show Miracles at Short Notice. An absolutely cast-iron 5-star show. We're going to start today's programme with a couple of songs from that, notably the spiritual, the sort of rip-roaring 2/3 of the way in song, which has one of those melodies which just lodges itself in your brain and you can't get rid of. And if I'm going to suffer, I don't see why you shouldn't. And that song's called The Mouse That Prayed, and it's followed on immediately by a song called That Valuable Cat. And then after that song, we'll hear a conversation between me and David Kingsmill, touching upon so much of what was available at the Edinburgh Fringe this year. Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
A mouse who prayed for Adam, blasphemed when not in hell, but the cat who feasted on that mouse thought Adam and his mouse be well. Every selfish call. Oh, every selfish call. The set of changes. Oh, the set of changes, Lord. Each man not perish on. great experiment. When decades of research is enough for one thing, it will be a great thing. To memory. Of the more accomplishments seen in this establishment must enter story. Put strychnine in the scraps he gets at dinner time.
Here's the salmon on the shelf. Once I'm grateful for his haste. Will that seem such dreadful waste?
I will go and drown the stable cat myself. He's an excellent pet. All we feel is regret.
If you kill the stable cat, the coachman won't be pleased. You'll have to tell him that the local cat's purple disease.
I
About
love
it
it,
wonders itself by leaping into a barn.
It's
We
phenomenal.
were raided by suffragettes who killed it in their grounds.
Fantastic, yes.
Or it took on the butcher's mastiff in combat and got chewed up from the road.
So many
My great experiment. Sugar this blood. My decades of research. Of my recovery. Of my discovery. What you have learned. The only way to prove it is always right on the solution. One will feel so. 17 years to still hold the glory. Teaching nothing, they said I could. Toss will feel so quiet. 17 years, empty and dying for age. Remembrance we shall cite. There is a heart. My career, decades of work. You brutal, coward people.
Can we include him in the strychnine diet?
It is a shame about the salmon. These are desperate times indeed. I was beginning to think I might have to cut short my visit. Now I must get on and write these letters, or isn't there time? I suppose lunch must be soon.
You're listening to Musical Talk at the Edinburgh Fringe. Well, David, it's lovely to see you, particularly in the middle of your throbbingly busy week, if I may say, as musical director of Hitler the Musical, which is going down an absolute storm.
It is, yes.
And we will, of course, touch on that. Selling out, by the way, I'd just like to say. So
Yes.
Well done. Honestly, it's marvellous to have a success. But let's talk about some of the shows that we've been to see here up in Edinburgh, which aren't Hitler the Musical,
Yep.
which is all the others.
Yes.
And we're going to start, I think, with Apply Within. Now, you know the composer of that.
I do, yes. We met 2 years ago on the Guildhall School of Music and Drama's Musical Theatre Summer Course.
So you're professionals together, as it were. But tell me, let's briefly explain what Apply Within is.
So it's a short musical about a man attempting to find a job. And as I think James himself said when we spoke to him, that's essentially the fundamental basis of the entire plot. But he has constructed it rather well, I think, in that you see all these different stages of this guy attempting to find a job and meeting the same people each time he goes for a job interview, and also interacting with his friends back at home. In such a way that there is what sort of is apparently a rather small plot develops into quite an hour-long musical that certainly to me didn't really feel like at any point that it was sort of putting you down for any length of time. It kept you on the sort of track the whole time.
No dip moments.
No.
No, I couldn't agree more, funny enough. In fact, it's the word I still think is most appropriate is exuberant.
Yes, very
Almost
much so.
From the first. It just picked you up at the beginning, gave you a good shaking down and said, right, we're having fun and so are you.
Yes, absolutely.
The day we went, I mean, the audience just engaged immediately with it.
They did. It was an excellent audience, and I think that always, and speaking from experience actually of performing here as well, of having audiences that engage straight away and audiences that take half the show to pick up.
Yeah.
If you do get an audience that engages straight away, it makes the whole job 100 times simpler. And I think that they got a fantastic audience that day, and it showed in the quality of the performance. We were there. And it showed in the quality of the performance that they then delivered back to us, and I think we got a phenomenal performance from
it. It was a virtuous circle in that sense, wasn't it?
It was.
But funny enough, that's exactly the thing. When I think about the archetypal Edinburgh musical, i.e. a musical that's been written specifically for Edinburgh,
yes,
the good ones are ones like that. In an hour and 15 minutes, you don't often have much chance to develop a plot with any great different level subplots, things like that. Or if you do, there are fairly basic point-to-points.
Yes.
But it's so much about the atmosphere and the attitude taken to get it across.
Absolutely.
This one, I think, was done so well because it was good material, performed well. And that's
Agreed.
two elements there, which you don't always see. I was reminded very much of Jet Set Go when I first saw it here in Edinburgh about 3 years ago. It was just one of those ones you immediately thought, oh, I'm clicking with this immediately. It had the same kind of vivacity.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what was so great about this was the very first song in the show, the first thing you heard, in fact, the first thing you heard, you walk in and you had that undercurrent of the typewriter.
That's right, yes.
Which I am going to take a stab in the dark and say was probably the main character typing up his CV, because he is accused of writing it on a typewriter at one point in time.
Yes, he's a bit out of touch with the job market.
He's definitely a bit out of touch.
And a bit of a
with the
Luddite,
job.
really.
Essentially, yes. But they then pick you up immediately with the cast of four, a four-part harmony song that set the stage and the tone for the rest of the piece exceptionally well.
Yes.
And I think that that's something as well, is they didn't try and sell you a dud.
No.
They gave you exactly what the show was 2 seconds into the show.
Straight in, yeah.
And if you liked it, you were going to like the show. And
Said,
I think both of us did.
Yeah, we did, yes, absolutely. So let's talk about the craft, particularly the songs, because obviously music talk is so much about the songs.
Indeed.
I thought they were really remarkably clever.
Yes.
We've discussed in the interview with James the idea of the like song.
Yes.
There's a song which, instead of the brash "I love you" or "I think I love you," it's actually "I think I like you," and that has a wealth of. It gives an entirely different bouquet of emotional responses, I think.
It does, and it's quite cleverly, although it's not used in this way, it's quite cleverly also then set the stage for an "I love you" song further down the line.
Yes.
Which could go into a completely deeper meaning of that type of song, instead of giving it the sort of rather superficial meaning that's quite often sort of been given to musical theatre.
It's love, in this case, is a particular kind of like, which we've already established is there. So what is this like? So you're right, it's an exploration, it's not an assertion.
And it's a question, and you come out of the end of the song and you don't actually really know the answer, because the both of the characters are saying, I think I like you, and I want to know if that like can go further. And the song ends with that question unanswered, which I think is a very, very clever piece of trickery. And really, it fits in well with the way that the piece is delivered, because, as James himself mentioned in our interview, the piece is left unfinished as well.
By which unresolved. I suppose.
Unresolved.
Yeah,
sorry,
right.
yes, I beg quite correct. But it's nice. It's a nice little parallel, because you never find out whether he gets the job. You have this song where you never find out in the course of the song whether there is actually something there, or whether it's just this instinctive attraction that lasts for a couple of dates and then disappears.
Or is it in fact like rather than love? Yes.
Indeed.
And that's just one song, or two we touched on there. I mean, at the beginning I thought it might have been sung through, because it really is quite spare with its dialogue and only uses it when it really needs to, and then when it does, it's got a great punch.
Yes.
There was song after song after song.
Which worked for the piece that they've written,
Yes.
because you ended up with this short plot. But because they didn't waste time in the show talking and talking and talking at you for 5 minutes before the next song, they could draw that plot out, and yet you still felt like you were moving somewhere, because the songs wasn't a we're going to stop this show and sing and then restart the show.
No.
It was very definitely a progression, but it allowed them to slow the progression down as a song does. Not in a way
explore
that
a facet of it.
Yes, not in a way that jarred the show, and not in the way that felt like it was slowing the show down, but it allowed them to slow the plot down enough that it gave them that leeway for...
Looking at it from sort of as text, you wouldn't say it was punctuation. You'd say it was actually each song was more like extra information in brackets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's actually a really good way of working a Fringe show, because as you say, in an hour, if you try and go supremely deep into the main two characters' sort of emotional feelings towards each other and what they were doing going for these job interviews, you'd end up with that would be your show, and you'd be finished before you could even start talking about their relationships with the people that they're actually being interviewed by. Which I think is a very important part of this show, and the multiple characters played by the other two cast
Brilliant.
are absolutely brilliant, and you wouldn't be able to do that. It would fall apart if you focus too much on the wrong people.
A highly accomplished piece, I think, actually. I mean, you couldn't possibly argue that it was just a series of songs. You couldn't possibly argue that it was a play with songs levered in.
No.
It was a properly designed musical.
Absolutely, but in the best possible way. You also walked out knowing that there was somewhere that it could go.
Yes.
And if they wanted to develop it into a further show and make it a 2-hour show and take it to the West End, there is the scope there to actually do that. It's not, here's our hour, we're done. It's, here's the hour that tells the story without going into it.
It's funny enough, the reason I think it's a great show, and I gave it 5 stars, is because I enjoyed it all the way through, and I'm still enjoying it now it's over. I mean, talking to you about it, it's easy to talk about it.
Very.
I have very happy memories of it, and I'm trying to work out if I can fit it into my schedule to see it again. And that's quite significant. I'm thinking, can I see it a second time?
Absolutely.
I think so much of that is the cast as well.
Yes. I would be thinking the same probably, except for the fact that it clashes. Well, it doesn't. No, it does actually clash with Hitler, doesn't it? Or at least it finishes too close to the get-in for me to get there. But
you've got a performance to give, which means
unfortunately,
you're
yes. But I would,
seeing a few shows.
If it wasn't for that, I would, with great delight, go back and see that again. I think it was an excellent show, and some people say that you shouldn't go and see a show too often, but going within in a couple of weeks seems perfectly fair to me. And I think that there's more. There is a depth in the show, which you could perhaps pick more of the second time you've seen it, because you understand the show better that way. And I think there'd probably be a fair few things, particularly in the first 10 minutes or so, that you might pick up that you weren't
you were
aware
acclimatising
enough.
yourself the first time. Yes,
absolutely.
I think that's very fair, actually. It's so often the way as well that once you know the narrative arc, then you can stop off on the way a second time and enjoy some of the details, see the countryside on the route.
Well, I've seen several shows in the West End multiple times.
Yes, so have I.
And in almost every case, I pick something new up. Even, further down, I think I've seen Les Mis 6 or 7 times now. And every now and then I spot something that I haven't seen before.
A new toast recipe for bread.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Cooking tips, yes.
Indeed. But so, you know what I mean. And I think
yes.
I think that you will get that with Apply Within. I think there will be something that you've missed, because particularly because you're concentrating on a different character.
Yeah.
You
indeed.
might. I would probably pay more attention the second time round to the. I don't want to call them secondary characters, but they're not. But they are
supporting.
They are supporting. They're not the focus of the show. They just happen to kind of drive it in a way.
They're very supporting.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I would probably focus more on them in the beginning, which I didn't do, because obviously they weren't the ones that were necessarily singing, but they were always doing something, and I was conscious of that, but I didn't see what. And if I went to see it a second time, I might look and go, okay, what are you doing at this moment in time?
What did you make of music from your sort of professional point of view?
I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I have a great deal of respect for James's writing. As I've mentioned to you, I have already heard 2 of the songs in a concert that he put on last year at the New Players Theatre, and it was very pleasant to hear them again. I was delighted to. I thought
in
they
context on this occasion.
in context, which of course just adds to them.
Yeah.
But they stood very well as songs. One of them being the Like song, actually. They stood very well as songs on their own, but they're better for being in where they're supposed to be. And I was very, very impressed with the writing. I think he's harmonically very strong. The 4 singers are used to great effect. And that I got the sense that everything that he's put in there, he's put in for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very... you're safe when you can say that of a composer, I think. You know that you're with somebody who's going to actually take you where the show should go.
It's very accomplished in that sense, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I don't have your musical skills for identifying things, but I like the subtlety of the lyrics. I like the fact that they were working on more than one level.
And it's a very clever set of rhymes. It's a very cleverly picked set of words, and it doesn't feel contrived. Especially in something like the like song. There's almost something in going, we're not going to do a love song, we're going to do a like song, that could backfire horrendously, and it doesn't.
I agree with that, and you say it doesn't seem contrived, and that's true. It's not contrived, but it is surprising, and it's not surprising in a jarring way. When we were talking to James, I said that there's at least one song where suddenly one of the couplets appears to have extra syllables in it which you're not expecting to be there, and yet they aren't. It's not done for false rhyme. It wasn't done for a show-off rhyme. It was done for a clever rhyme, but it wasn't one of those rhymes you said, "Oh, I can see why they put the extra syllables, the extra music in to make to allow." They didn't trim their words to cut the song. They haven't extended the song to get these extra words in either. It wasn't done purely for cosmetic reasons. It was intrinsic to the song. It just did something different to what might be expected.
And it's not a cheap gag either.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is also so often you get things like that put in precisely because.
Yeah.
It's even if you're not musical, you notice when something. Most people can hold a beat, and they will notice that something isn't quite right with what they've just heard, even if they don't know that they've noticed it. It's not used for that purpose. It's used because it has a reason.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. That's apply within then. I hope it does go somewhere further.
Agreed. I think it definitely deserves to.
And from the sublime to the ridiculous, perhaps, in a very literal sense, we also saw a show that's described as a musical, and it's a musical in the sense that a pantomime is a musical.
Yes.
In fact, it owes a great deal to pantomime. It's called The Uglies Do Edinburgh, or Uglies Do Edinburgh. Now, in the trade, it's actually a bit of a trade term. Uglies is the term for the ugly sisters.
It is.
The two bad dames in the entire pantomime canon. Dames are always good, except in Cinderella.
Yes.
Where they are the ugly sisters. And they are usually punished or banished, or they don't come out of Cinderella well. Even Disney has to wait till his third sequel to the Cinderella saga in order to redeem one of them. So when I saw this advertised, Uglies Do Edinburgh,
yes,
I was intrigued. This felt in a way like seeing a live action version of the subsequent story of the Ugly Sisters after Cinderella, which, as a pantomime fan, that's what got me.
Yeah.
So we went to see this today, in fact.
Yes.
How would you describe this show? Looser is a good start.
Very definitely looser. I think in the true sense of pantomime, they weren't afraid of going off script.
Oh no. In fact, they rather liked it, I thought.
They rather liked it and physically admitted it.
Yes.
And broke
the audience liked it too, actually.
The audience loved it.
Yeah.
And I think that they even liked it when one of them broke the fourth wall in a way that it's not normally broken in pantomime and said that's not in the script quite clearly because it wasn't.
Yes.
Rather than a joke that they were going for, one of them did in fact just say something completely different to what they thought. And I thought it had a real charm. It was in a nice little space. It was in a space that felt you felt quite close to them. This is G2 at Griffin, which is their smaller space and seats 50, I believe.
More intimate, isn't it? Yeah.
More intimate. It's in thrust rather than in standard.
Yes.
Standard front-on audience. And we indeed were sitting on one side, and it allowed them to draw us in, I think, into their little created world, which was
actually physically touched as well as emotionally.
Yes.
I was stroked by a dame, I don't mind telling you.
And I thought they delivered the piece with a great sort of sense of who they were, which was this wonderful pair of ugly sisters. And
who were devoted to each other, actually, interestingly. They do that teasing thing, which the ugly sisters often do,
Yes.
I'm more beautiful than you, and that's all there. But you actually see these sisters genuinely are sisters who love each other, funnily enough.
Yes, and I think that there's something in their teasing that actually, in a way that pantomime goes above and beyond reality by a million miles, there was a slight sense of grounding in this. Because I think anybody who's got a best friend or a sister or somebody who they mercilessly poke fun at would have seen a little bit of an echo of that in the performance that the Uglies gave, because it was... They call themselves sister superstars, and we're sisters. And there was a focus on we are sisters. We're not two people poking fun at each other. We are a conjoined unit that happens to enjoy ribbing each other in a way that is entirely kind of give and take.
And if you want to look at it, even at a slightly sort of more subtle level, the conceit of the plot is they come to Edinburgh from Cinderella's castle in order to find their own princes. You know.
And in a break from the pantomime canon, they have chosen to come to Edinburgh rather than being sent there, which I thought was a rather cute little touch.
But what's interesting is that, I mean, you could read it, but it is in fact their bonds with each other which stop them finding the loves of their lives. They're actually, in a way, married to each other. I mean, we're taking this at a level of sophistication which I suspect many of the audience might not have.
Yes.
But I think, you can clearly see where the bonds are. They go out on the pull together, they come back from the pull together.
Yes.
And
both equally unsuccessful.
Yeah, but they would be destroyed if one was and the other wasn't. The only way they'll ever succeed is if they pull two brothers.
Well, quite.
So now Will's has gone, only Harry's available. So it's not going to happen.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But no, I thought that they delivered this charmingly. They had a good audience in today, I think. They got a good reaction from them. But I think that I got the sense that they would have managed even if they hadn't, even if it had been a quieter audience, because they were very confident in what they were doing.
They'd have enjoyed themselves first. But that's entertaining in its own right.
Yeah, and I think that there's a level of pantomime where, as an actor, you perform most of the time for the audience, and if you happen to enjoy it, that's it is. However much it may not seem it in a way, it is still a job, and you are there to entertain your audience. There is a level in pantomime, I think, where you can be there to entertain yourself as well. And if you get a little bit self-indulgent in pantomime, it doesn't matter.
As long as you don't take it too ridiculously far.
Yeah, of course.
You bring the audience with you. You can be as indulgent as you like.
Yeah, but if the audience isn't being cooperative, and if they are being difficult and quiet, you can bounce off each other in order to drag the audience in. And then once you've got them, you go back to where you should be. But of course, they didn't need to do that today. They got a fantastic audience today. And I thought, particularly where they were, one of them was convincing the other to be various different animals, and they managed to get an audience member to suggest a boa constrictor,
which he then went on to
mime rather well, I thought, particularly wrapping himself around his sister.
There was also a lovely bit of corpsing when she was supposed to be hypnotised.
Yes, indeed, and lying extended out on their suitcase and completely bursting into laughter. Which I suspect probably wasn't helped by the fact that I was right next to them. They know me because we met
you share a venue,
3 or 4 months ago. Well, we share a venue anyway, but we also met at a charity event that was put on by the press officer of the venue for something different. And he tried out 3 acts there, which was Hitler, myself, and the Uglies. And so we met them.
Crikey.
We met them there as well, and I had quite a long chat with them at the time. And we sort of said, we must see each other's shows and so on. So they've known me. They've seen my show already. When it was on last week, and they know who I was. I was sitting right next to this guy, and of course, the more he laughed, the more I laughed.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it's probably one of those things where he was just trapped in this vicious circle of he couldn't stop laughing. Bless him.
Well, you have a very infectious laugh, if you don't mind saying, David. And there you go.
Maybe I crippled it. No, I won't take sole credit for that. But it was a marvellous bit of corpsing, and it just didn't matter. The audience found it funny.
It's actually quite brave, because before we went in, we were also wondering whether it was going to be pantomime in its truest sense, or whether it was also going to, how far it was going to veer into sort of gay drag, which can be very saucy. I would say it was 80% panto,
yes,
but it did allow itself a few very risque jokes. Now, you can do that in pantomime as well, but normally you've got the context of it all being set in fairyland, and it's very clearly a fairy tale, and there's a narrative of a fairly basic nature going on. In this time, you were shorn of all that. There was no sort of scenery of a castle in the background. It was just a flowery screen in the background.
Yes.
So it was actually, you could almost describe it pantomime dames live and uncut, because
yes, you could.
I didn't know them that well, but that's what they appeared to be. But in the sense that it was actually just essentially the two of them, a screen, a couple of trunks as props, and a few costume changes, but actually nothing else.
No,
and that's great.
Yes,
panto.
And the other thing I think, which relating to the jokes, was the fact that the jokes were innuendo. There was no plot that made you talk about, I don't know, the cactus or something that you could therefore link a joke to. No, that wasn't there.
It was almost stream of consciousness, wasn't it?
It was almost stream of consciousness.
The plot is they've come to. You're ostensibly in their hotel room. They've arrived in Edinburgh, on the lookout for fellas. They get invited to a gay club, even though they don't realise it's a gay club, because they've been invited to this party for men, and they think they're going to pull. They go. They come back single-handed. They're double-handed in their sense, but they come back having been unsuccessful. They get a bit concerned, they get a bit homesick, and then they discover they're for whatever reason the plot says that they can't go back home afterwards. So it's actually, sisters are doing it for themselves, which is the badge, I think. In that they are now freed of their fairy tale context to go off and actually find a real life outside of their narrative.
Yes.
Once again, I'm perhaps overlaying the plot a little, but
maybe. But then that's kind of what we're there to do, isn't it?
And it was a musical.
And it was a musical. They did.
Go on.
But well, I must admit, I thought they sang. They're very good singers, and they had some lovely harmony going on. I always think I'm a huge fan of barbershop quartets, actually, and I think
you got half the price of that.
Well, yes, which I mentioned purely on the grounds that I think there's something about the harmonic mix of male voices with no female voice input.
Yeah.
And actually, I think the same goes for female voices on their own as well. I just personally
single gender choir. Well.
Yes, yeah. I just personally prefer a male voice choir to a female. But the two voices work extremely well together. I think they said that they've, if I remember rightly, when we spoke to them very briefly afterwards, they said that they were pantomime dames together, which is what actually triggered this show, and the sort of mad idea, as it always is, of bringing something to Edinburgh. But they do work very well together, and their voices work very well together, and it just kind of served this yes, they match feeling that we've been talking about.
There was specifically written songs as well. I mean, you wouldn't call it an integrated musical.
No.
It was much more a comedy with songs.
Well, if memory serves, there was actually a point where one of them cued the sound guy
to
start the song.
Yeah.
Where, it is not that is a let's stop, we're singing.
But it really is, isn't it? Yes, yeah. You couldn't say they were plot development songs.
No.
And you could pluck them out and put them in other places. But you mentioned the Sister Superstar song at the beginning. They would launch into a song at the drop of a... I'm sorry, I've just been suddenly reminded of the creepy story. Which... Because it was so splendidly anticlimactic at the end. Wasn't it? Essentially, this woman is... the dame, one of the sisters, is in bed reading herself a spooky Edinburgh ghost story, and the story is it's a dark and stormy night, and you get the sound effects, and
yes,
she's lying in bed alone. She's got nothing but hot toddy, and there's a storm raging outside, and suddenly there's a creak of a slow door and footsteps, and then suddenly it's there's a Scottish housekeeper who comes in, and she's suspicious, and all she says, "Would you like a cup of tea?" "Oh yes, thank you very much." And that's it. The end. And then she said, "Oh, that was a very strange story, wasn't it?" And it was so sort of pathetic.
Yes, and I think that there's
nice
actually
comedy.
Yes, and I think there is actually a skill in delivering an anticlimactic joke.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And they set it up beautifully, particularly with the repetition of Dark and Stormy Night, which came about 5 times with sound effects, and then at least 3 more times afterwards, very increasing speed
to get through it
without the sound effects and adding little bits on each time, which I think was a marvellous setup for a joke.
And it was done while one of the sisters around the back changing the costume, and you could hear her saying, "Get on with it." So,
Yes, and again, no fourth wall,
which
I think serves this kind of show spectacularly well.
It's a beautiful thing, really. I think,
agreed. Thoroughly enjoyed.
Now, we went from that show, which was a delightful slice of silliness, to a different kind of a delightful slice of silliness.
Yes.
Evil the Musical.
Evil the Musical.
Do you want to describe Evil the Musical?
Well, it's quite a challenge, I think. It's... Evil the Musical, essentially telling the story of 3 different sets of evil masterminds, if you like, or sets of masterminds. There's the extremely camp Professor Pinky.
Yes, who wears pink and has
who wears pink and was it leopard print? I can't remember. Some kind of print on his on the fur, and has the power of attraction. The German, whose name I can't... The Baron...
With the donkey fixation.
Baron von something or other, which I can't remember, with the donkey fixation and...
Every time he would use lots of terms of phrase that had horses in it, but...
With donkeys instead.
Donkeys.
And actually, I think he also used the phrase... I also think he used the phrase, "You can't swing a donkey." Not enough for him to swing a donkey. And I can't...
He had a steel spiked...
A steel spiked helmet and uniform to nearly match at any rate. And I forget his power briefly. My mind has just gone blank.
Well, he liked trains. I remember that.
He did like trains, but I forget exactly what his evil ball did. They all had these evil sort of orbs or balls. And that will have been the Eurofighter flying over for the tattoo.
Oh, yes.
Afterburners go on just as it passes over basically where we are, which scared the living daylights out of me on day one, I don't mind saying. And there were then the evil three girls
It was
forming.
the Powerpuff Girls Go Bad.
Yes.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Dressed in pink, blue, and green with matching shoes, stockings, eyeliner, hair extensions, fingernails, clutch bags, and essentially everything else you could possibly think of. Who had the varying powers of persuasion, amnesia, and
bringing people back to life at the end.
Well, yes,
quite a good ball to have. That one.
A very good ball to have, which didn't work until the very end of the show, which I thought was quite a nice little touch. And they couldn't quite decide.
Literally God in the machine.
It was literally God in the machine, and they couldn't quite decide who they were for the majority of the show, which I thought was quite a nice little joke.
A little squabbly.
Yes.
And then there was
and Super Guy. I forgot. I beg your pardon. Incognito, of course. Yes,
the tripartite terror.
The tripartite terror, who was marvellously portrayed schizophrenic character with. Between 3 and 5 personalities, depending on the scene. Who I think actually stole the first half of the show for me in the scene where she tried to hold up the bank.
Yeah.
That was hysterically funny, particularly if it's not giving away a plot point. The rather wonderful moment where the most evil of them held up and said everybody on the floor, at which point the extremely nice schizophrenic character jumped on the floor, so the actor held up the bank and then jumped on the floor herself, which I just thought was such a brilliantly imagined or brilliantly realised gag. It worked so well.
She was good physical comic as well as
very good physical comic, constantly moving. It's a done gag, isn't it? This idea of moving around to portray different characters, but she did it so beautifully. And I think the fact that it wasn't 2 or 3 or 5 different people talking to each other, it was one person with multiple personalities. Reminiscent, actually, and this is a completely unfair comparison, but reminiscent of the Schmeagol scene in the second Lord of the Rings film, where he's talking to himself. And you see him
now, because I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, you see him talking from side to side, and it's this wonderful thing of you almost think there's 2 of them, and then in the very last clip of that scene you see him turn from side to side and you realise that it is just him. Well, obviously it's just him because there's only one of him, but it's very well filmed and it had a feeling of that cleverness to it. And then Super Guy, who is this superhero, and the mute sidekick. And the 2 minions, of course, who are less central characters to the plot but do have some rather funny gags of their own. And I think that the really difficult thing to describe is this a musical or not?
It was a very accomplished comedy.
Yes, extremely accomplished comedy.
A number of songs.
And I think that was maybe it's... And they raised this themselves in our interview. They say in the interview that perhaps there was this rather long chunk in the middle of it that didn't have a song, which both of us picked up on.
Yeah. And none of the songs were really Nexus Point songs, were they?
No. They served their own individual purposes, but... I think that you could easily play the show without them, or you could easily put them into their own context and perform them, which in a way is a nice touch because it makes it an extremely malleable piece, but it does kind of raise the question mark over the subtitle of the show.
Yes. Is it a musical piece?
Is it a musical piece?
Yeah. I mean, we're discussing it because it had enough songs. It wasn't just that there were 2 or 3 songs. You know, there were songs all the way through.
There were.
It wasn't an integrated score.
No.
I think you'd have trouble calling it a score properly.
Yes.
But, I mean, the songs themselves were nicely done. No great shakes. I didn't get the impression. But none of the lyrics have lingered in my mind at all. With one exception, which was about... They had a rather nice wordplay because we commented on it actually in the show to each other. Which was the one about where someone's deciding to be bad for the longer term, so she is bad for good.
Yes,
using for good as in for the longer term rather than
which was I think was a real coup de grace for that song. That was one of my preferred songs of the show.
Same here.
It's yes, I agree with you. It's not desperately memorable, but I do remember thinking at the time, this is really good fun and I'm enjoying it. And they really delivered on that final line. I thought that was extremely cleverly done.
It went somewhere. It had a payoff.
It did have a payoff. Yes, absolutely.
I'm not sure all the songs did, but
as far as music goes, I think massive credit also has to go to the rather marvellous voiceover, which led between each scene, which I think there were some fantastic gags in the show, but as far as running gags went, that was the best one, which introduced every scene, which they used the same piece of scenery the entire way through, occasionally turning bits around, and introduced every scene with... And now in an abandoned cave, or and now on an abandoned mountainside, or and now in an abandoned cave, rather like one you've just seen, and so on. Just off the M62, normally.
An office disguised as an abandoned cave.
Yes, and that as a set piece was genius, and there was a certain amount I thought they had a rather sense of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy about it, where you get that wonderful bit where the book comes in and starts talking, and they have that little bit of music that plays while the book is talking, and it very much had that feeling to it, and I thought that was a stroke of genius.
And for me, it reminded me of the television Batman series of the 1960s, which is almost the epitome of television camp.
Yes.
And it also had a kind of bad fans tune in next week kind of over the top, slightly ironic narration. So yes, it was showing its roots.
But I think the thing was it's paid a great homage to others, but it also stands up very well on its own. And I think that there is something inherently funny about a scene change being covered. I saw, we obviously won't talk about because it's not a musical, but I saw a rather fantastic sketch comedy show that did the same gag. Every time a sketch finished, the stage lights went out, they delivered a very funny audio over the speakers while the cast changed the set. But the lights came back up and they went straight on. So there was no point at which the audience was allowed to stop and relax, and that's very much what Evil delivered.
It keeps the comedy ticking over, doesn't it?
Yeah, which I think, particularly given the slightly, not meaning this in any derogatory way, uncertain nature of the show, I think the fact that they actually had that to keep you engaged in it, it achieved its purpose. It kept you engaged in it to the point that you didn't kind of stop and get pulled out of the show.
Exactly where we were with Fly Within. There were no dip moments.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I definitely think that they served themselves well with that.
Now, you've seen a couple of other things, but I want to briefly touch on Hitler, which has been a blue chip success. I mean, there is no other way of putting it. Hitler has never been more popular.
Which,
I said earlier.
Which surprised us, I think, as much as it surprised anybody. We came up here with this crazy notion, and we've now done 7 shows and we've sold out 7 shows, which is extremely gratifying.
Fantastic.
There was only one audience that was slow to pick up as well.
Oh, really?
There was one audience that we had sometime last week, which took 10 or 15 minutes to really warm up to the show. Today was by far and away the best audience.
Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Do you think that was very early, the slow audience was early on in the run?
If I remember rightly, I think it was our third, but I don't entirely remember. I just remember there was
before
one.
any reviews came out. Is it because, in a sense, the reviews give you the license to enjoy it, whereas early on there is always that question which we discussed previously.
Yeah.
About people are going in, but they're wondering what the tone's going to be.
That's an interesting question, actually, and I honestly don't remember, because we did have reviewers in on day 1, but they didn't publish on day 2, so it could quite possibly have been.
Is that release to enjoy?
Yes.
Because now everyone knows that Hitler the Musical is a funny show. It's not to be taken seriously in any level. You know, it's not neo-Nazi.
Good heavens, no.
And you do look good with a moustache, as I've said, David. So you want to keep that.
We do occasionally get the odd person who stops us on the mile when we're flyering and sort of questions what we're doing. And as Isabel mentioned in the interview, which I believe is going out tomorrow as we speak, we do say that laughter is the ultimate victory, and the first person to be offended by this show would be Hitler, were he still alive.
He'd have got a comp, probably, though, wouldn't he?
I suspect he probably would have done.
Hearing aid.
Yes, I rather worry about what might have happened to all of us after it. But it's definitely not pro-Hitler or pro-Nazi in any possible way. It's utterly ridiculous.
It weaves a tapestry of ridiculousness around the sparse facts of his early life, essentially.
Yes, and I think that there's something in that. There's something in the fact that there are some things in there that people know he's famous for. There are some things in there that people might not have known. And again, I'm sure, I think I remember Isabel mentioning in the interview that we had, the majority of the facts that we actually present are true. Or at least are rumoured in enough places that they've become accepted.
You'll find them in a standard Hitler biography.
Yeah, there are some things that we will never know, of course. But we do our best with what we can, but we don't present any of it in a way that you could possibly take as being positive. No, we basically point and laugh throughout the entire piece. And we're just delighted at the reactions the audiences have had. We've had, after every show, somebody comes up to virtually every one of us and says, that's a great job. Yeah. But it's the laughter that you get mid-show. It's the point where your entire audience just laughs. Is so pleasing, because we've come up here with this. We're taking a bit of a punt by putting... Okay, we're taking a very, very big punt.
And putting him on the stage. Oh, punt. I'm so sorry. I misheard.
But if it pays off, that's brilliant. And it's a fantastic experience for us when it does. All of the cast have just graduated from the musical theatre course at Trinity. I've just come out of Trinity training as a musical director. We're all getting this fantastic experience of being here in the first place, but we're also getting the gratification of being able to go home and enjoy what's just happened.
Oh, indeed.
Because we take as much from a performance, I think, as an audience does, to an extent.
Well, both feed off each other, don't they?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously the audience gets a great show, we hope, which is what they've come here for. But we have also come here for something, and that's partly just to tell our story and have a bit of fun. But we get more out of that if you get something back. And, fingers crossed this continues, touch wood this continues, because this is fantastic for us. It's so confidence boosting, and it's a great experience.
Also, can I compliment you, though, because it's not just the cast. You because you're a musical director and you're playing the piano, the keyboard in the corner.
Yes.
You've also got laugh lines which are your laugh lines.
Yeah, and I'm very, very pleased with those. They're a lot of these are developing as the show goes on. There are certain things that are changing. And there are little bits and pieces that people are doing differently every night. And there are things that I'm doing which have gradually got bigger. And there's a particular point in the show where a scene is... We have the narrator who is purportedly
Hitler.
the real Hitler, who is there to oversee everything. And she makes an executive decision to cut a scene.
Can I just say that immediately that use of the pronoun she has already made that interesting to many of our listeners.
Excellent. Well, there you go. There's a little bit of a tidbit for the show, hopefully mitigating the fact that I'm about to give a gag away. But she cuts a scene, at which point I flick over 3 pages of the score to skip onto the correct page. It is actually the correct page I move to for the next scene. And that's something that I've done for the last 4 nights.
But the audience looks at you doing it because, it's clear that you're the disgruntled...
Well, yes, and it's also because I've been more and more increasingly eye-catching and engaging with the narrator, because we're on opposite sides of the stage. And so they see her focusing on something and look at me. But today is the first time that my flicking over of the pages, and I suppose it's been getting bigger, has really got a laugh. Which I was just doing it because it's what the MD would do.
Yes.
Well, obviously this wouldn't ideally happen in a musical that it wasn't. A diva MD would do, yes, let's go that way. And so I very kind of huffily flick over the pages, and it got a great laugh today. And it's just one of those things that's developed out of the show. I didn't have that gag on day one. It was something I think I put in on the 2nd or 3rd day as being a possibility. I just kind of thought of it. And it's one of those... And there's a lot of this show, either in this process here, or way back when, has... I don't want to say accidentally come out, because it's not. It's come out of a creative process. But it has been... Something's been unintentional, and it's just been very funny.
But comedy begats comedy, quite often. Particularly in something which can be fluid. So, for example, we were talking about The Uglies. Now, there's no way, if we went to see that show again tomorrow, it would have exactly the same jokes in it. The laughs would be at different points. The audience reactions, highs and lows would be different. It's going to be exactly the same for your show, because it's not set. It has it's built... It's like a jelly. It is set, but it can wobble a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without falling over.
And I think that Hitler has the same thing that the Uglies do, which is the sense of, obviously, it's the two of them working...
Fake boobs. No. Well, actually, there's a male member of the cast who's got fake boobs.
Well, a bra, at any rate. Yeah. I think the thing that the Uglies obviously have is the two of them working together. Yeah. And that's what Hitler is. It's 13 of us working together. I mean, yes, I am the musical director in the sense that I'm the musician of the group, and I'm the conductor and the musical supervisor. That's not the right word. I don't know what the right word is. But I do all the music while we're here. But that's not to say that I've had all of the traditional input of a musical director. Some of that has come from other members of the cast.
Oh, absolutely.
Some of it's come from all of the members of the cast, I think. Everybody has put something in. I've added a couple of lines of dialogue to the show.
It's almost like you're a member of the cast who's playing the piano.
Yeah.
In some senses.
I just happen to be predominantly mute for the show.
Yeah.
But it's a 13-person effort, and that's... I think the only thing that... In fact, not even the arranging. There's some of the arranging and harmonies that have been written by other people as well. Although I've done the majority of the piano work on that and some of the harmonies. That's not to say by any means that I've done all of them. There's some of them that have come from all over the place. And I think that's what's also added to this development of humour, is the fact that somebody suddenly pops something up that you didn't see coming before.
You're listening to Musical Talk, at the Edinburgh Fringe. David, lovely to see you again.
And you?
A little bit later in the Fringe. We've both been to see several other shows.
Indeed.
Some of which have been musicals.
Yes.
So, what have you seen which has really sort of tickled your proverbial fancy?
Well,
or has your fancy remained untickled?
No, very, very much tickled. The first thing I saw when I got here, actually, was a very unusual one, which was a Chinese musical.
Oh, go on.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. I believe it's Ching Chung. And it tells the story of the emperor's daughter disappears at the very beginning. You see the party saying, "Where's she gone?" And she's gone up the mountain of Qingcheng Mountain, and she's in search of an elixir which will cure her mother, who is ill. And on the way, she meets a warrior who is up there trying to learn the Qingcheng sword fighting style. And they kind of fall in love. And the warrior's seeking. He wants to learn this style to exact revenge on the man who killed his family many years before, and it turns out towards the end of the show that this man is, of course, the emperor.
Yes.
And so it's sort of, the typical. It's quite. I say it's the kind of story that I think we perceive to be a typical Oriental
folk story.
Romance. It's the kind of I have a love of Oriental film. And I've seen this style of story before, but I thought it was extremely enjoyable. It was quite a big production. It's obviously an international touring company. It was on at the Usher Hall, and they actually took the first 9 or 10 rows of seats out of the hall to extend the stage because it was so
it's
big.
A big old.
Their set was amazing. They had, I thought this was quite brilliant actually. They had 2 sets of mobile rocks on the stage, which formed the sort of steps of the mountain and some layering, and it was brilliant. They were moving around quite a lot, and at one stage you could see underneath them, and you saw obviously the wheels that were moving around, and you also saw pairs of feet running around moving this. So there were obviously it's an hour and 40 minutes long, and there were people underneath these rocks the whole time.
As
moving
rock
these
operators.
as rock operators, but it looked brilliant, and they had sort of all sorts of flora tied into netting, which would fly. Not fly. I don't know if you call it flying actually, but it would be drawn across the stage like a curtain. Very, very impressive. The costuming was actually done by the person who costumed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, so very, very impressive costuming. And the singing in it was absolutely wonderful. The music was quite interesting. It was very Oriental, but had a flavour of Western music to it as well at points, and extremely good singers. And all in all, I thought it was a rather spectacular production.
Got to ask, do you know if the score was specifically written, or was it traditional songs interpolated?
I'm not sure. I do have a programme. I picked a programme. I quite pointedly didn't read it before I saw the show, because I quite like exploring that sort of thing and just going, let's just see what happens. They had
Taking it as it comes.
they had surtitling. I did make them. I got seats in row K, which I thought would be rather good. Of course, row K was the second row back because the seat's going out, so I spent the whole time craning my neck. But you did get what was going on without having read anything, and I have to admit, I've been too busy. I haven't been too busy to read it, but I've not got round to reading it yet. I think they were probably newly written. The flavour of what was being spoken everything fitted too well, I think, to have been something that was... I suppose they could have modified words, but I think it was written purely for this.
Based on right, that's
and of course, it's not what you would expect to be musical if you're talking about musicals in England or in Scotland. It was a musical. It was very, very much just Oriental music. It had that style. Yes. I've heard a few bits of Oriental. I've got quite a few bits of Oriental music actually on my computer, and it definitely had that feel.
And how was it received by the audience on the day?
Very, very well.
Oh, it was. Right.
I confess I didn't turn around and see how full the auditorium was at any point, but it went down very well indeed. And I don't think it could have failed to, really. I think it was very, very impressive. It was a complete mixture. There was dancing, there was singing, there was sword fighting elements in it, which of course is very traditional Oriental. It's part dance, part sword fight. And there was some spoken sections, although it was not quite through sung, but almost.
Light dialogue.
Yeah. But yeah, it went down very, very well, and I thought it was an absolutely stunning production.
And so out of the blue. as you say, well, by the sense of not your traditional. I like the fact that you're brave enough to go and see things which are outside what we might call the Broadway tradition.
Yes, and I think it's partly I came to the Fringe, and my aim here was to go and see something I wouldn't normally go and see.
Eclectic choices.
Which is why the number of musicals I've seen is actually quite small, on the grounds that that's what I would normally go and see. And I think I've only seen one book. Well, yes, it is a book musical, but one established musical. I think everything else that I've seen is new writing. But I wanted to see different things, and this seemed like an obvious thing to do.
Now, just briefly, a lot of our listeners won't have seen Sir titles in a theatre.
No.
So how does it operate?
Essentially, you have a screen above, at the top of the proscenium arch, and the translation of, or indeed in the English National Opera's case, they use them as well, so it's not a translation, it's the words. But the words of the musical are projected, or possibly it's a plasma screen, and they're actually logged in, I'm not sure. But they're displayed, so that you can either translate or interpret what the singers are saying, because obviously in these large spaces, and it's usually unmiked, it can be tricky to pick up everything, and there's a lot going on. But in this case, of course, it was a translation, so it was you were getting the words and you could understand what was being said.
Now, you said you've also been to see one established show, as it were.
Yes.
What was that?
That was I Love You Because. Where I say it's an established show, it's not established over here, really. It's not been done very much here. But it's an American musical, and it's essentially the story of Pride and Prejudice, but gender-swapped. So the Bennets are...
And contemporary, presumably.
And contemporary, yes. It's set in contemporary New York. And the Bennets are a pair of brothers, rather than being the sort of sisterhood that you would find in Jane Austen's work. But it's a rather brilliantly done story. And at the beginning, very, very beginning of the show, it begins with Austen, who is this character who is very much in love with a girl. He's a greetings card writer.
Oh, right.
But all of his greetings cards begin with "life is like her," and then some metaphor that follows it. And I think the beginning one is "life is like a seesaw. It's much more fun with somebody else." And this is a running gag that carries on through the show. But anyway, he's very much in love with this girl called Catherine, and he walks in on her with another guy, which is how the first song finishes. And it's then this story of him and his brother. His brother takes him out and basically says, right, we're going to find you someone to get over this girl. At the same time, Marcy has just broken up with her boyfriend.
Marcy rather than Darcy. I see where we're going here. Yes.
Oh, yes. And her friend Diana takes her... I think I'm right in saying, and I must admit, I don't remember the book that clearly. I think that her ex-boyfriend was Larry Wickham. So it's all tied in.
It's knowing.
Yes. But her friend Diana basically says you've got to wait your sort of appropriate time before you find another guy, but you've got to find Mr. Wrong in that time in order to find Mr. Right later on. And so they all go on to... They all find they find each other on JDate, which is the Jewish dating website.
I see, right.
None of them are Jewish, but they all say, well, obviously we're going to find the wrong person because we're going out finding someone who isn't looking for us. And they all meet each other, and Marcy and Austen end up together, as do Jeff and Diana, Jeff being the brother. And it's a 6-man cast. You have the 4 of those and 2 characters who play the various bartenders, baristas, and other characters that your Chinese restaurant owner at one point. But it's a very, very well-written piece.
And who's putting it on?
It's being done by 2 Squared Productions, who are also doing The Last 5 Years, which unfortunately I haven't had a chance to see, which I would like to have done.
Which is on every year up in Edinburgh, I can tell you.
It is, and I
think I've been up here 5 years, and it's always on. So for the last 5 years, you have been able to see The Last 5 Years.
Well, it's actually, there's 2 productions of it this year. And I think 2 Squared's finished... Oh, no, hang on, which way is it round? No, I think there's another production has been going, and just as that one finishes, 2 Squared picks up. But 2 Squared's only doing a few productions. They're not doing that many. They've while I'm here, I go home on Sunday, the 21st. I think the 17th and the 19th were the only 2 shows that were happening while I was here. So they haven't done an awful lot. But they're sort of mix and matching when they do them, I think. I'm not sure if the 2 shows...
They do it as a double, is it? Yeah.
They do it as a double. But I thought they did a really good job. They were in Augustine's, which is a converted church.
It is. It's on the George IV Bridge, and it's a lovely bit. I like that venue, although someone else was telling me that they don't like the seats. But I thought it was
well, the only problem I had, I was sitting in the back row. Both myself and the others who were coming, I went with two other of the Hitler cast and a couple of friends, and we all managed to get there a little bit behind the time, and we're at the back of the queue, and we ended up in the back row. The problem that we had there was that the rake wasn't good enough for them when there's a flat floor, and then a slightly raised dais, which presumably is where the altar would normally be. And if they were on the flat floor, particularly sitting down on the sofa, which they do quite a lot, it was very difficult to actually see what was going on without spending your entire time ducking to one side. I think I was slightly unfortunate in that I had about 3 tall people between me and the stage. But it was a difficult rake to see down. And that made things a little tricky. I think the one thing that they were slightly unfortunate with was they were caught out with the sound in the venue. Because the way that they had it set up was it was all done as an end-on stage, and the band was slightly off to one side.
They're in an antechamber. Usually.
They are in an antechamber. Now, one of the Hitler crew saw another show there, and they said that the sound was fine, but that show didn't have drums. Whereas this had, I think it was about a 6-piece band or 7-piece band, including drums. And there were points where the singers got slightly overwhelmed by the band because nothing was mic'd. And I think they suffered just a little bit there because there were. I know the show. I know the show quite well, but they were being drowned out. And there were points where I couldn't quite pick up the words, and I wasn't 100% sure what was being said.
I've always liked Augustine's, but I've been very lucky with the things I've seen there, so maybe I have a sort of glowing...
Well, I don't think there was anything wrong with this, and I think if we'd been further forward, it wouldn't have necessarily been so much of an issue. I think they were just a little bit unfortunate with the sound, and I did speak to one of their members afterwards, and they didn't get a proper dress run in. They didn't fit that into their tech schedule, because it's quite tech-heavy, that show. And the lighting and everything took up quite a lot of time, and so they didn't actually get, as it does. But they didn't get to do a full run in their tech space. So that was, we went to the first performance, and it was the first time they had run the show in the venue.
Oh right. So
all that said, I think they did a really, really good production. I really, really enjoyed it, and I think that all credit to them for putting on a very good show. The singers were very good, and I thought that they delivered it very well in the space that they had. They had the two. I don't want to say ensemble. I suppose they are ensemble characters, although they have a lot to do in their own right. Did the majority of the scene changes themselves, and so there were actually points where they were on stage in the middle of a scene, and there were times even when they were standing at the back on the dais and just kind of watching and overseeing everything that was going on, and it was effectively done.
Sounds interestingly directed. Who's the score by?
The show it's music by Joshua Saltzman and lyrics by Ryan Cunningham. And it was done in 2006 off Broadway. So it's a relatively new show.
And how would you describe the tone of the music? Very Broadway, or?
Yes, I think so. It's very upbeat. It's quite poppy, but it doesn't move over into being a full-on sort of pop rock musical. I don't think at any point. It knows it's got a grounding in musical as well.
Yeah.
And so it's a nice mixture of the two, I think. But it's definitely got a very modern feel to it, which suits the way that they've decided to write the piece.
Yeah. And it sounds ideal for a sort of Edinburgh ensemble if it's 6 people and a small orchestra.
Yeah. I think it's a very good Edinburgh show. I think it took them a bit of effort to cut it down. It was an hour and a half. And there were, if you compare it with the cast recording, there were songs that went quite a bit faster. In order to, particularly the patter songs were brought into a bit more speed in order to sort of fit things
tempo,
in. More tempo. And a few things were cut. There were lines I noticed or verses that had been cut out. But it worked, and I think it's a very good show for that.
That's a standard fare, though, isn't it, in Edinburgh? Because everyone's got these time scales which they have to meet. So.
Unless you've built the show. And even, in fact, if you have built the show, and Hitler's an example of this, if you have built a show, we ended up cutting material. Some shows are built to the hour. Most shows, I suspect, will probably be built to be bigger than that and then cut down anyway. So it's not surprising.
On audience reaction, of course, because people sometimes forget to factor in applause.
This is
sometimes quite rightly.
Yes, hopefully in most cases not. They do get the applause, and it does add a couple of minutes to a show. But yes, it does run that. But no, I think this was a very good production, and in my opinion, worthy of a 4-star rating.
Oh, splendid. Moving on.
Yes.
To your What else have you seen? That was the established show. You
That
must
was
have
the
seen
established show.
Fresh writing, then you've seen
I
as
have
well.
seen Fresh Writing. I saw a production yesterday called Wasted Love, which I was told the names of the people who wrote it, and that is in the interview that I held with the musical director of the show. But it was been put on by the RSA&D students, the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. They're doing 3 shows up here.
They do one big one, and then they divide their cast into 2 halves, I think. And
Yeah.
one goes off and does one new writing show, and one goes off and does another new writing show.
I believe that's right.
Yeah.
They're doing Sunday in the Park with George.
Is their big show.
Is their big show. And then they've got Show Choir and Wasted Love. I have only seen Wasted Love out of those 3, but I thought this was a rather spectacular show. The details of it are in the interview that I held, but in brief, it's a support group for people who are struggling with relationships, but none of these relationships are conventional.
No.
You've got all sorts of weird and wonderful...
Is it a comedy then? Comedy musical?
It's very much
Oh,
a
it
comedy.
is. You see, now that's interesting, because Wasted Love, on a personal level, I think that sounds quite dark.
Yeah, and I didn't
So I'm
quite...
surprised that it's a comedy, yes.
Yeah, I didn't quite know what I was going to see. I have to admit, I hadn't really done an awful lot of research into this. I just decided...
It was a punt.
It was. It was a shot in the dark to go and see something that was new writing. I was aware I wasn't seeing that many musicals, but I wanted to see new stuff. And I can't really remember what drew my attention to this. It was just one of those odd things that I just kind of picked up on and thought, let's go and see that and see what it does. I had a hole in my diary at that point, and one of the Hitler team suddenly said she was thinking of going, and we just said, let's go along. But it was a very, very funny show. They have, all the characters have individual pieces that they sing, and these are all describing different situations. There was a rather marvellous song which was sung by a guy who has this inability not to pay attention to a woman's backside, and if he spots one that he likes, he kind of... it's basically a stalker song.
He's a bottom fetishist.
He is, and he sort of follows them around, and he goes into some detail.
He's into potty totty.
Some slightly disturbing detail, actually, to the extent to which he follows them back, and he gets to know who they are by going through their rubbish and things like this. And it's genuinely slightly creepy, but brilliantly funny. And there's all kinds of songs like this. There's another one which is mentioned in more detail in my interview, where the guy can only be satisfied in a relationship if his partner is terminally ill. And there's some very, very bizarre stuff in here, and where some of these ideas come from, I don't know. But they've formed it into a very, very funny show. It's delivered by a cast of 8, if memory serves. The music is all on stage. They've got 4 musicians, or at least 4 people who played.
You mean actor musicians?
Sorry, actor musicians. Yes, clarify that. They have 4 musicians, I think, that played, although all the cast get out egg shakers at one point. And I really enjoyed this. I went in completely open-minded and got a show that I thought was absolutely brilliant.
Well, last year, both of the new writings, neither were complete, I'm sad to say, but both of the new writings last year were brilliant, and indeed one of them was my pick of the Fringe. That was In Touch by Dougal Irving.
Yes.
So they always have a very high standard. I have to ask, however, because I'm getting resonances with another famous musical. So you say it's about a support group for these people who've got their emotional difficulties or their relationship difficulties. So they presumably, it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, they meet and they discuss, so it's a therapy group, is it, kind of thing? Because obviously that's a different structure, but by exploring everyone's relationship problems, of course one naturally thinks of Stephen Sondheim's Company.
Yes, but I think...
I guess it's not really in that mould then.
No,
it
not
sounds
at all.
broader, certainly.
And it is... The way it's kind of done is that the music is diegetic for the most part. But when one of the company gets up and starts to sing their piece, it goes into a dream sequence style, and the music kind of becomes non-diegetic, and this sequence takes place. Sometimes it's done within the confines of the therapy group, and sometimes it becomes this completely otherworldly experience. And it's not... I suppose to a certain extent the theory might have borrowed, but it doesn't have the same feeling to it. I think it's more ridiculous. And it really... I mean that in the best possible way. It is balmy at points, and some of the things that they've actually sort of portrayed on stage, the way they've done them. There's, if I can describe this, there's a moment in one of the songs where one of the characters has various forms of sex with several different characters, and there's a point where they hold up. Different things with different people. But there's a moment where a sheet is held up, and a light is shone through from behind, and you see this
shadow play, presumably.
Amazingly overdone shadow play of these two characters having sex, and it's almost like they've smashed the fourth wall.
Yeah.
They haven't, because actually they do in a couple of points. They haven't at that point, I don't think. But it's so big and so out there in a crazy way.
It's a fairly full-on musical, by the way.
It is, and that is the dark. I think possibly the darkest and most controversial song in the piece.
Was it complete?
Yes,
it was. Now that's interesting.
It was. They only wrote the piece about 3 months ago. It's been finished very. And the MD talks about this in my interview with him. But it is a very recent piece. I believe I saw a cut-down version of it, on the simple sense that one of their singers had laryngitis and was unable to perform her song, which was a great shame.
But it is being presented as a complete piece.
But it's being
not an extract or just one act.
No, it is. It is. I mean, I speak to the MD about where it's going, and there are songs that have been taken out of it, but it's not at any point going, this is a bit of something. They produce a full show, and it has a start and it has a finish, both of which are incredibly cleverly managed. And I thought this was just a brilliant piece of new writing, and there's a lot of life in it, I think.
But you didn't get to see the other show that's being put on by the Academy.
The show choir?
Yeah, because I tell you what, once again, I haven't either, but when you see a title like that, the only thing you can possibly think of is Glee. Now, I don't know if that's what they're aiming at.
That's how it was. I don't know if it was one of their cast. I can't remember who said it to me, but somebody did describe it to me as a Glee-style show. And I think I mentioned that in my interview with the MD, and he didn't do anything to sort of dispel that.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, it's kind of aimed at being a Glee. I don't know if it's a parody and a like. I don't know enough about it to comment, really. But yes, I think there's a strong element of that in there.
That happens every year, of course. You do see, whatever's been popular, particularly if there's some kind of musical reference to it, then someone will have written a version of it, and I'm sure there are many Glee-alike musicals around.
Glee is an extremely logical thing, I think, for people to do. It's big. It's going to attract an audience because it's something doing something akin to a big TV show, and
it's reviving local choirs as well.
Yeah, well, I think it. Glee had a hit and miss reaction with me. There were some songs that they did on there where I kind of wish they hadn't, really. Particularly, I think, things that weren't so musical theatre. But there's a lot of stuff in there. And I think that the premise of Glee, I basically watched it, and my reaction to it was I wouldn't go barreling out of my way to try and catch every episode of the show. But I kind of want to run a Glee choir. It's very inspiring, and I don't suppose I'll ever end up running a Glee choir. My ambitions are more towards shows, but it does have that impact of I want to get up and do something, because it shows musical theatre in a very, very musical theatre style, singing in a very positive light. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are taking hold of, and that is brilliant. If people are being inspired by something to actually get out there and sing, that's fantastic. And it does. I think the other thing is I like the fact that it shows people who you wouldn't normally, the sort of stereotypical people who quote-unquote won't sing.
Yes.
Singing and having fun. And singing is all about having fun, and it's not something that should be limited to the sort of stereotypes that it gets attached to, particularly with younger people, I think.
Well, for me, looking at it from a more lyrical point of view, I'm just delighted that the word Glee has been revived in its original sense.
Indeed.
A few years ago, when people spoke about Glee clubs, no one actually knew what you were talking about.
Yes.
Other musicals that you've seen up here at the Fringe?
I've not really seen much else in the way of... I suppose the biggest musical thing that I have seen, aside from that, would be the Four Puss and a Piano. I went to go and see their show.
A small choir, you might say.
Which is a small...
Well,
yeah.
It's intimate cabaret, really.
It's four guys having an absolute whale of a time. And you do very much get the sense that they're just up there having fun. But they produce a wonderful show. I really, really enjoyed this. Again, it was one of the first things, or near the top of the list, I think. I saw it midway through my first week here. I just came out of it grinning like a Cheshire cat, because you can't really help but do otherwise. They had some great little bits of audience participation. They had that wonderful trick of a song that starts off sounding quite innocent and then goes... I mean crude in the funny sense of the word,
yes.
rather than being anything...
Smutty.
Yeah, smutty. And, you know, 4 guys singing in fantastic harmony, piano playing, some that weren't. There were songs that didn't involve the piano at all. They had backing tracks. But what struck me was how much better they are in real life than they were on TV. And
really?
I thought they were great on TV, but they are stunningly good singers in real life. I'm really, really impressed by the sound that they produced.
What did they sing?
A great mix of stuff. There was obviously songs in there that were known. There were songs that they've presumably written themselves. I don't know who wrote what. There was and of course I'm going to attach myself to this, there was a spectacular musical theatre parody sequence.
Excellent.
Where they took off, I would suspect, somewhere in the region of about 24 musical theatre songs in a row.
Oh, marvellous.
Ranging all over the place. There was several rather brilliant Les Mis sequences in there. And it's a great range. It's not limited to one style, which I thought it added a wonderful variety to the show. And they gave themselves a lot to play with.
What an interesting phrase, given the name of the show.
Well, yes, and actually, you can take that in virtually every sense.
Yeah.
There was a blow-up doll on stage.
Oh, was it?
At one point, a male blow-up doll on stage at a couple of points during the show.
You know the old joke, I used to have an inflatable girlfriend, but I had to let her down.
Well, this guy stayed blown up for the entire show, and take that how you will.
So, but give me an example of some of the well-known songs. Were they pop songs? Were they songs from the 50s? Were they 30s?
Oh
Were
Lord,
they standards?
they went through a 60s range, if memory serves. I have to admit, you've caught me out slightly because it was a while ago. I should have made notes, but I didn't sort of think about it at the time.
But as far as you're concerned, they were fairly well-known songs.
Yeah, well, they had the audience kind of singing along with them at
really?
points, or humming along with them at the very
Here's
least.
an interesting question. Do you like that in a show? Because when I go and see a show, unless I'm specifically asked to sing along, as in a pantomime or something like that, I really hate it when the audience presumes to join in with a song that they know and they like, unless they've been asked to do so, because I haven't paid to hear 200 idiots singing out of key. I paid to hear the idiot at the front who's singing in key.
I think it depends on the show. It was relatively harmless with this guy.
Right.
They presented it
Yeah.
as something that was intended to be a dialogue with the audience, I think. Obviously there were songs that were new and they sang all of that, but if there was something that came up that was known, they did. And when I say they were singing along, I mean it was and apart from the point where they specifically asked us to sing along and taught us a bit of one of their songs, it was more of a, oh, I know this and I'm kind of humming to myself. It was by no means was the entire audience kicking in. But it was relatively harmless in this case.
Okay.
I know what you mean. I think there are points where you just think, oh, shut up, I want to hear what I paid to hear, not what people who paid to come here have decided to chip in.
The very first time that ever happened to me was this was in the 90s when Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Doodah had been revived yet again in the West End, and I was being dragged up to see it. And I was sitting in the audience at whichever theatre it was. And
I don't remember which one. I saw that production as well with when Jason Donovan was in it.
Well, it was Philip Schofield by the time I went to see it as Joseph, so it was the second iteration.
I can't remember where it was. Anyway, yes.
But the overture started, as it would, at the beginning, and the woman in the seat in front of me said, "Oh, I like this one," and started singing along. And I thought, but this is the overture. So I had a horrible show because I could barely hear Philip Schofield, but I could hear Married from Essex chuntering away in front of me.
Yeah, that I wouldn't enjoy that one bit. But that is the difference. I think with the Four Puffs and the Piano was that they didn't. It's not presented as a book show. It's presented as they came into the audience. Sorry, let me rephrase that. walked out into the auditorium on a couple of occasions and interacted with members of the audience. There was one point actually where, several points throughout the show they picked on a guy in the front row.
Well, that's yes.
And at one point...
in a nice, affectionate way.
In a nice, affectionate way. And actually, at the end of that, in exchange for a peck on the cheek, he got a free copy of their CD for being a good sport and taking part, which I thought was rather wonderful. Yes. But they did, it wasn't... The show wasn't confined to the stage.
Yeah.
And in that situation, I don't think it's okay. One would probably throw out Cats as being an example of the same thing, but that's obviously a very different kettle of fish. But they were interacting specifically with the audience in a "Hello, who are you?" style. And so I think in that sense it's not so much of an issue for me when people join in. If they did it at Joseph, I would be very, very unimpressed. I'm lucky to say I've not had that in a theatre. I did have it I think when I went to see the first of the new Star Wars movies, there was some 10-year-old kid behind me who'd seen it and was telling his friend everything that was just about to happen, which was incredibly frustrating.
Yes, absolutely.
And I suppose is that we're talking about the musical equivalent of that, and I know how much that annoyed me. So the musical one would probably get on my nerves
same
even
thing,
more.
But out of tune.
Yeah. Oh dear, yes, probably. Actually, once there was some rather good singing in our audience.
Good.
They a couple of points. One of them actually went out and stuck a microphone in somebody's face, and I was in the second row, and one of them obviously heard me belting out the song that they asked us to join in, and spotted me and kind of pointed me in a thank you for being loud kind of sense.
You've been fingered by 4 puss and a piano.
Yeah, take that how you will as well. But yes, that was. I thought it was rather successful from the audience participation.
Oh, fair enough. Well, if it's the kind of environment that sort of allows for that, that's good.
Absolutely. And again, 5-star show for me.
Right.
I came out of that and I was just happy. I think it would be very difficult to come out of that not grinning.
That's very interesting to hear. Obviously, I mean, you obviously have more. I like individual singers. I don't so much like little groups like that. I don't like. I mean, they've got pianos. They're not a cappella. But that kind of thing doesn't...
I think they did a tiny bit of... If memory serves, I think there was a tiny bit of a cappella in there.
There's a lot of a cappella choirs up this year. There's the Oxford Gargoyles, all the King's Men.
There's several from Oxford, actually.
Yeah.
Out of the Blue, of course, are up here. The Alley Cats, I don't know, not sure where they're from, but I just spotted the great name. I think there's a barbershop quartet in America called that, which is why it caught my eye. But they've got a rather wonderful image in the brochure, which is just a black square in their thing with 2 cat's eyes on it, which I thought was very reminiscent of Cats, actually. But I've seen them. I'm assuming it's them wearing white T-shirts with the cat's eyes on. There's a few others. But I think I differ from you there in that I love a cappella harmony, close harmony groups. And I thought these guys harmonised extremely well. One of their first songs, if not their first song, I don't remember the order, had some fantastic harmony in it.
Well, I'm bald, you see, so obviously I have no affiliation with barbershops. So,
Very good. So I think that's run down pretty much my list of musicals that I've seen, because I've just seen... Oh, actually, I think I will just throw in, and it's not a musical, but I have to recommend this just because it was so damn good. If anyone can see Bane, it's one of the most amazing pieces of theatre I've ever seen in my life.
This is straight drama, isn't it?
Yeah, well... No, it's comedy monologue.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's a one-man film noir. It's actually 2-man. But there's one actor and there's a guitarist who literally sits on the stage 95% of the time with his head down and I think it was a fedora. I can't quite remember. Or a trilby, certainly, if not. And I only saw his face once, I think, during the whole show, and he just sits there with his head down, looking very, very, very sort of speakeasy background, playing guitar as backing music. But it's one man doing a film that he actually does 3 of them. There's Bane 1, Bane 2, and Bane 3. And he does it, so I saw it on a Tuesday, which was Bane 1, Wednesday would have been Bane 2, Thursday Bane 3, and then he restarts. And each one is an hour long. And how he sustains this, I don't know. It's one of the most amazing pieces of physical theatre as well that I've ever seen. And he does a film noir show playing all the characters himself with different accents, different voices. He does all the sound effects. He gets into fights and throws himself across the stage.
Sounds impressive.
Yeah, he does slow motion segments. There's a character in them who fires sort of darts. This is Bane 1 that I saw. And he does slow motion segments where a dart goes past him, and he kind of acts all of this out. And it's just incredible. Again, a 5-star show from my point of view. Not musical, but if anyone can catch Bane, do it, because it's just so worth seeing. But anyway, yes, I think that runs out my musical list. So your turn.
Well, there is a show I'd like to discuss with you, just because it's played on my mind.
Intriguing.
Well, it's called The Stones of Eden.
Right.
Now, for many British listeners will know that Eden was a village in Yorkshire during the Great Plague in 1665, 1666.
Oh, I think I caught a mention of this. Did you mention this on your first Edinburgh?
Yes, I
as something that you were going to go and see.
That's right.
Yes, I remember that. Now you say that, I remember the name.
And I did, and it's famous in British history because they decided that they were going to close their borders, if it were, so they didn't spread the plague, and it's exactly what happened. Although, whilst 2/3 of their population was wiped out, there were no other plague deaths in the north of England, so they were able to contain it. So they are heroes in a way. So I went to see this, interested to know how they were going to do it, because obviously, in terms of narrative, you can see where that's going to go. That's not a happy ending per se.
No.
And indeed, the piece is not played as a cheerful piece. But there was something about I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. It was an amateur show.
Right.
And it was a very accomplished amateur show. But I didn't quite like it.
Okay.
By the way, I know I normally don't talk about shows, but this is so interesting I feel I have to.
Go for it.
So
I'm very intrigued now.
I didn't quite like it, and I couldn't work out what. And I was wondering, was it the structure? Was it the way it was performed? It certainly wasn't the way it was performed. It was a big ensemble piece.
Right.
And so there was one man who played the gravedigger, who's also the narrator of the story, so he keeps propping it along.
Okay.
All the other characters played different characters who are affected by the plague, and this. So the tailor, who is the man who imports the material from London that's got the fleas in it, which gives everyone the plague.
Right.
Is one of the actors puts on a tunic to become the tailor, but then when he dies early on, the tunic comes off and he goes back to the chorus. So they all sort of come out, play their part, and go away again. There was one slightly bolted-on love story about this young lady who's in love with a boy in another village. And of course, when the plague strikes in the borders, she can only sort of sing to him from a distance, and then she dies of the plague. But it felt like an excuse to get a love story in, because the story itself doesn't obviously have a couple in it. It's not about an individual, it's about
and
a
it's
group.
one of those things, isn't it? They say a good story has a love interest in it, but
it's
only... Well, no, it strikes me that that's only true if there's a place for it.
Yeah.
And that sounds a little bit like they sort of tried to do a grimmer version of a Romeo and Juliet story in a show that's...
Yes.
I wonder whether it doesn't sound like it needs it.
It felt like, let's have a love song, how do we get one in, here we are.
Right.
And each of the songs was twice as long as it ought to have been. But I'm being critical here, and I don't mean to be critical, because it had something, but there was something wrong with it. And I worked out eventually, and it was only a day or so after I'd finished it, because it was playing on my mind, I couldn't work out what was wrong. And I think what I've realised, and when I say what was wrong, there's nothing wrong with it at all. It's a perfectly legitimate way of writing a musical, but I don't think I've seen a musical of this style before.
Okay.
Because what I realised was it wasn't a musicalisation of a drama, it was a musicalisation of a story. People might say I don't see the difference, but the narrator was the driving force behind the story. So he was telling the story. So basically it was a narrated story rather than a dramatic progression, and therefore what you don't get is you don't get any emotional heart from that. You get a man moving the story along every time the historical facts move on.
Yeah.
And so ultimately what I saw was a perfectly competently musicalised story. It's like an audio book. I felt I've seen an audio book musicalised rather than a drama musicalised, if you get my drift. So essentially it was one man's voice.
Yeah, it sounds...
Even though it was an ensemble piece.
It sounds almost like it wants to be a song cycle, but it's kind of
Yes.
got this... a narrative... I don't know, it sounds from what you're saying, was the narrative slightly disjointed from that?
Well, I mean... Yes, I mean, the gravedigger would come out periodically and, shunt the story on a bit. But there were he was the only character who was in it from beginning to end, except the vicars. There were 2 vicars in this town.
Right.
But it was very odd. It was also tell and not show, I suppose.
Ah, right.
And I think ultimately that's what I found wrong about it. So I'm not criticising it in any way, because it was doing something different with a musical to what you usually get.
Interesting.
But because it was so far from what I expected, I also didn't enjoy it. So I didn't hate it, I didn't enjoy it. I just came away with an intellectual puzzle, which it took me 2 days to unfathom.
That's interesting. It's a shame I don't have more time here, because that sounds like something now that I would, with that knowledge, I would quite like to go and analyse.
See for yourself.
That does sound like an interesting way of writing. I suppose, I mean, obviously the narrator idea can work, but it does sound as if it was very much narration stop, song stop, narration stop,
exactly what it was.
which is a style of show, I think, that is feels rather dated now. Maybe that's part of the problem, is they're reviving something that has been moved on from. And if you're not well aware
an example
that
of a musical where that happened in the past, then?
Oh, God.
It doesn't feel like a model from the past to me, but because I think of pantomime when I think of narrators. You can have a narrator in a pantomime.
That's very true. But I don't necessarily mean so much a narrated story, but I mean something where you have a song stopping a show, so that it's not the song itself doesn't move the show on.
Yeah. It's illustrating a point rather than progressing a plot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas contemporary musicals have a tendency to keep moving.
That's right. You can't pluck a song out of a modern musical very easily.
No, I wish I could think of an example of an old one. Now mine's just blanked. I need to stop being put on the spot.
You come to the wrong place for that.
Be more prepared to be put on the spot. But yeah, I don't know. That would have been an intriguing one to follow up.
It was curious. Let's put it that way.
Interesting.
Well, David, it's always great fun talking to you, and I think we probably ought to finish with a little coda about your own show.
Okay.
Which was
Not So Far to
Reach. That's right. Which was only playing for a few shows. So
3 days.
Yes, I feel very lucky to be one of the elite who saw it.
Oh, thank you.
I tell you, I was very impressed because I didn't quite know what to make of it, because its subtitle is for songs of David Kingsmill.
Yes.
And with no disrespect, old chap, you're not yet a household name,
No.
except in the Kingsmill household.
Yes. Well, I suppose my surname might be, but not for musical reasons. Yeah, and I suppose that's part of... I might have renamed the show had I known what it was going to be. Originally it was a more serious show than it's turned into, and for what it eventually became, that name was possibly a bit of a faux pas. And I would have done better to not have that as a subtitle. But
well, you came up with a very interesting conceit, didn't you? In the end, you said relatively late in the day.
Well, it actually came out of a monologue that I bolted into the Battersea Barge preview that I did, and I almost cut it 5 minutes before going on stage because I was worried it wouldn't work, and it was almost a musical theatre stand-up routine, and I nearly cut it and I didn't, and the general consensus at the end was that it was the best thing in the show. And I got several bits of feedback saying why not use that as a wraparound, and so I did, and I created this concept of what would it be like if life were a musical, which is something that it pops up a lot on Facebook, and social media in general, but Facebook in particular. I know I think I still am a member of a group of If Only My Life Were a Musical, and I sat down at one point and I thought, well, what would it really be like? Because people think of the kind of big things, but obviously if your entire life is a musical, all the mundane things are like what to have for breakfast, which is one of the bits that I use in it a couple of times, and so that became the conceit for the entire show.
Well, I hadn't realised you had your comics talents, because I think that's what's... Well, I don't mean that rudely, but...
No, I was just going to say neither had I, to a certain extent.
Well, we haven't known each other a huge amount of time.
No.
But you came on in Westcott and Bowler.
Mm-hmm.
It was just you and a keyboard.
Yes.
And a duck.
And a duck.
A rubber duck. Who was merely incidental to the proceedings, is it?
Indeed. He just sat on the piano and looked pretty.
Looking enigmatic in a way that only a rubber duck can.
And can I just say, just for the record, you were the only person... I had a combined audience, I think, of 42. You were the only person who asked me what the duck was about.
Really?
Yes.
I'm amazed.
So was I. I was genuinely quite surprised. One person knew because it was related. It came from a joke. I saw a production of Curtains that had ducks in it, and we've been laughing about ducks ever since, and that's where the duck thing came from. So obviously she knew. But you were the only person who asked me, which I thought was quite surprising.
Glad to have been the duck-related questioner. It was actually very accomplished. It was an interesting conceit, and I think if you hadn't had the question about what would life be, it might have been it would have been a different show.
Very.
So that hook was quite useful.
Yes, exceptionally useful.
And for me, bizarrely, I had just come from a show where the same question had been asked.
Oh, really?
Which was called Doris Day Can F Off. Which turned out not to be a musical at all. It turned out to be a comic investigation into what would life be. It was a musical when this man had...
Fair enough.
The protagonist had sung every interaction he'd had with a human for 3 weeks and secretly recorded the responses. And some people had responded back in song, some people had just ignored him.
Oh, interesting.
And then he did some interesting stuff with, he would isolate certain words or phrases and then underlay music to them. So he would play them over and over again with isolated scores. And
Okay.
So it was actually an oral... It was a psychological investigation and an oral AURAL experimentation
Right.
with sound. So having come from really quite an odd piece to yours, which was not an odd piece and a very enjoyable piece, but asking the same question was an interesting contrast.
I would have thought so. That's a shame I didn't see that one.
It was, but you were very funny. You did
Thank
a
you.
fantastic song about tabloids. Tabloid newspapers, which obviously is hugely relevant at the moment, but was very, very funny.
Yes. And actually quite true.
Yeah.
It's something that the song is I wouldn't mind fame, but I don't want celebrity.
Yeah.
And it explores the difference between you have people like Dame Judi Dench and Sir Ian McKellen, who are household names but don't end up on the front page of every third tabloid newspaper,
quite.
and then you have a whole other group of people who do. And I think there is a fundamental difference between those two groups of people, and I would rather be in the if I have, touch wood, I will one day be that known for something, and I would want to be in the Sir Ian McKellen group of people who don't get plastered over every other newspaper.
It's because they have a profession for which they are famous, rather
Yes,
than
and they don't go
being
out
famous.
seeking,
Yeah.
or sort of doing anything foolish or whatever it happens to be that gets you into the tabloid newspapers. I wouldn't want that. I want my own life, and I would like to be known for what I do rather than for who I am as well, I suppose, but I don't want my private life being invaded.
Quite right too, yeah, absolutely. So there was a lot of good material. Some of it was more serious. There were extracts from these putative musicals, if you like.
Yes.
So all the way through, but what was interesting was that you held it all together with your own personality, and you get up from the piano and address the audience direct, which I thought also helped a great deal.
Yeah, well, the character was basically a bigger version of me, and it was a character with.
That's the hat then.
The character was the character from If Life Were a Musical, and it was something that I used for that. And when it became obvious that I was going to use that as a wraparound, it seemed obvious to use a larger-than-life character, and that's what I did.
I have to say, you're a great credit to us here on Musical Team because you agreed to join us here.
Thank you.
Because I can see not only are you insightful, you've also got performing skills.
Thank you very much.
Perhaps we might get to hear one or two of your songs again in the future.
I hope so.
So people can at least live some of Edinburgh this year, even if they didn't make it up.
And with a bit of luck, I never expected this. This was just to show off. To display my
Showcase.
songs in a, I've only just showcase, better word. I've only just started songwriting, and I wanted to have a shot at showing my work. But since it has been a reasonable success up here for the small audiences that I did have, I would like to further it. So we'll see.
I hope so, David, and we'll speak again.
We will.
David, as always, thank you so much for everything you have to say, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you very much.
shortly.
Likewise.
Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast. Well, there we have it. Myself and David Kingsmill in conversation at several different venues across Edinburgh at several different times, talking about shows we'd seen and hadn't seen. And remember, details and websites and links to most of those shows are available on the Musical Talk website, www.musicaltalk.co.uk. But as this is the last episode about the Edinburgh Fringe this year, let's finish off with a look at the show that we have identified as our pick of the Fringe. Yes, it's the 5-star show by James Lark, Miracles at Short Notice. And it's a marvellous show from the off. Let's hear another song from that, and then a short interview with James, which I conducted towards the end of the run of that show at the Griffin venues.
Have you ever thought what it must be like doing what you ought every day like? Superintending the silver and the glass, and the linen and the mowing of the grass, and the pantry and the plate cupboard, and polishing the brass. Have you reflected how he is affected? Doing the correct thing in the correct way, in control of every aspect of what you survey, a routine for every detail, no room for delay. Each day, think of every symptom he might display.
I should go mad, torn to deviating administration mad.
now and then, when some people stay, something in his mind seems to go astray. He'll have delusions, is caught up in a plot. All his logic momentarily forgot, and he'll obstinately think, I guess there's somebody they're not. Doing the correct way.
Way in control of every aspect of what you say. Every detail of every day. Each day. How horrid.
That's what has me worried.
You don't mean to say he's taken a fancy about someone here. How thrilling, who?
You.
Really?
Absolutely.
Who does he think I am? Come,
Well, a Queen Anne. That's who he thinks you are. The one and true Queen Anne. That is the product of his fancies and beauty.
what a funny theory. Oh, no, I think it's really good. I think it's really good. There's a king of Queen Anne.
Is that wise?
Oh, there's no harm in it. There's nothing dangerous about Queen Anne.
What does posterity chiefly say about Queen Anne?
Oh, nothing. She's a colourless personality. The only thing I can really remember them saying is Queen Anne's dead.
Exactly.
You don't mean to say he takes me for the ghost of Queen Anne?
Ghost? Oh, no! No ghost ever ate with such a healthy appetite. It's more complicated. All his life, Queen Anne has personified everything that's done with the dead and died. And it perplexes him every time you pass. At each dinner time, he has to fill your glass while you talk about the lovely time you had in the Alsace. So where you're sitting, something's unbefitting. He's mad, trapped in a deviated administration mad. Noiseless and powerful in his tribulation, having to take every care, having such a look at their omniscient and everywhere. It has driven him mad.
You don't mean to say why he has that? Not because of that.
I've been alarmed since he looked at you, darkly glowering, and then I heard him say that she ought to be deceased, and ought to be if he had his way. That's what he said. Star is what you dead. You see, the thing is, as far as he's concerned, he's merely doing the correct thing. Each day, having such a good and everywhere. It's a driven mad.
James,
Hello.
congratulations. A really great piece up here in Edinburgh.
Thank you very much.
How's it looking from your point of view?
From my point of view, I've had a fantastic Fringe, and it's not often one finds oneself saying that, actually. And I don't think our cast necessarily realise what a cushy time they've had, because to come to the Fringe and to get reviews at all in your first, to do a week's run in the middle of the Fringe with a new show, an unheard of company, to get any reviews is
Impressive.
faintly miraculous, and we've had several reviews and lots of positive things said about us. Lovely audiences, quite sizable audiences.
Good.
We're not playing to the Fringe average of 6 or whatever it is, so we've had a wonderful time, and everyone's seems to be getting through it pretty well. We had probably the hardest show was the third one, where the sore throats and the illnesses started to creep in, and when we got through that show, it probably in fact the best show that we've done so far, I thought, yeah, this is going to be fine.
And are you pleased with it now? I mean, obviously you've been with it since the beginning because you wrote it, but it's a world of difference between writing it, rehearsing it, and then actually putting on in a performance with audience there.
Well, of course, I've
How
learned
you
a lot
happy
about
with
it.
it?
I am very happy with the show, and I knew that I would be because it had such a long gestation period. But of course, I've learned stuff about it. Of course, I will do another rewrite and fix some of the things that need fixing. The other thing, of course, is that in the course of rehearsing it, I realised that I'd written essentially a full-length musical, which you never know when you're kind of doing it. I sort of began to suspect when I realised I was on to kind of song 18, but it has had to be massively cut for the Fringe, which I think we've done extremely well, if even if I do so to myself.
Well, I wouldn't have, there are no obvious gaps.
No, and I was keen to keep in all of the numbers as well.
Yeah.
Some of the songs now musically make a lot less sense than I think they should, because we've just had to keep the bare bones. But because so many, because they're all narrative songs, you couldn't afford to lose any actual numbers, except maybe for a couple of set pieces, which we couldn't lose because then we lose the couple of set pieces. So
that will be The Mouse Who Prayed, I guess.
That'll be The Mouse Who Prayed,
Which
yeah.
is a great number, and if you don't mind me saying, you will be hearing from my solicitors, because that's the one I keep waking up to.
That's the one I keep waking up to.
Your Clovis asked me, he said, what's your favourite number then? And I said, well, they're all great, but there's one, and I couldn't remember the name of it, but the rhythm kept, the melody kept coming back, and then it kept coming back, and then it kept coming back.
Yeah.
And I remembered the lyrics as well, and I thought, oh, I know, that's the one. So you can pass that on if you wanted.
Well, thank you. I mean, don't go to my solicitors. That's all cribbed from other composers, of course.
Is it?
Oh, it's half
you're
Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat, and half Blow, Gabriel, Blow,
Oh,
isn't
well,
it?
it's the compulsory spiritual
Of course.
about 2/3 of the way in.
But I mean, as I think I may have said to you before, it's deliberately spiritual because it's drawing a vague parallel between Tobermory the cat and the attitude towards ethnic minorities in Edwardian times. So that is deliberate. And Tobermory has to be slightly otherworldly, maybe. Could be even more than we're playing it in this particular show.
Well, that's actually, I like the performance there because you get a real sense of sort of drift. He does drift in and out, and also cats drift in and out of sleep as well. And
Yes.
there's that kind of sort of a nappiness, if you pardon me. I don't mean wearing a nappy, obviously. I do mean as in he has you get the sense that he's always on the verge of sleep, but still on top of the game.
Yeah, well, it was
Nicely superior.
It was the director's idea that he should fall asleep in the chair during the song in which everyone plots to kill him, rather than just go off stage, which is what I'd written. To have him actually in the centre of the stage while this is all being discussed.
But it's full of lovely touches, and the woman who plays the fat Duchess who won't stop eating.
Mrs. Cornett.
I've said this off record, but it's like having the spirit of Margaret Rutherford in the room. She really portrays that perfectly.
I think for a girl her age, and I would say also an attractive girl her age, to make herself look so unattractive on stage shows a real maturity.
Well, maturity is the word.
But she's properly grotesque, isn't she?
Well, she's got the full grey bun.
Yep.
She's wearing padding, I assume. Mannerisms, the sort of daintiness that comes with certain fat people, actually.
Yeah.
And she is. When I say, I don't think she's cribbing from Margaret Rutherford.
No, I don't think so. But
there's a
it
certain,
has that.
Yeah, in the world of.
Yes, that dottiness as well.
Oh, absolutely. No, I like that. And I like I like everyone's comeuppances, and it's nicely timed all the way through. All your subplots pay off at different times.
Yeah,
rather pleasantly.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm very pleased with that, and I'm also pleased with just out of expedience, really. As soon as someone's bumped off, they become a servant because boosting the chorus. But what that has inadvertently affected is this sort of growing claustrophobia. But by the end of the play, you're completely surrounded by servants.
And in a sense, the well-to-do do feel isolated. In fact.
Yeah.
They're worried about things being. They have that sense of isolation doubly because they are worried about things spreading out. So
absolutely.
In a sense, they're trying to keep themselves isolated, and as you say, that's underlined. There's a lot of good stuff, and it's got too many layers of subtlety for me to say here. And also, I don't want to blow the gaff because I do hope that people will see it either when it's on in Bedford. Or later if it should go somewhere else.
I do hope it will go somewhere else. There's been a bit of interest already, so fingers crossed.
I'm genuinely pleased. But at the moment the Bedford ones are confirmed. So when and where?
Bedford Theatre, 15th, 16th, and 17th of September.
And that's open to the public?
That's open to the public. It's a nice big theatre, so we can fit lots of people in. And we will be doing the less cut version as well, so it's a chance to see it, in two halves with the interval, which is kind of actually structurally how I wrote it. And when we were cutting it, a lot of the cuts came around the kind of the interval point because, of course, we don't have to do all the reiteration that happens after 20 minutes of drinking. So you get the less cut version in Bedford.
Fantastic. But also there's a blog, isn't there?
Yeah, we've been having a lot of fun, and of course the cast are all up here for the first time.
Yes.
They've given me a boost of energy, I have to say, as a jaded Fringe performer, to come up with people who are even enjoying the flyering. It's fantastic. So I've had a really good time, and they've gone into it with a great sense of fun and been writing about their experiences. It's a jolly good read, I think.
Splendid. And how can one find that?
That's the link to the blog is also from bstproductions.co.uk.
So every reason to go there.
Absolutely, yeah.
I can't think of one
and some
reason
lovely photographs and a few audio clips.
So it's got the works. So
it's got the works.
It's a showcase. That's what
it is.
Like. James, I wish you great success. You've written a great 5-star piece. It's my pick of the Fringe. I wish you every success, and I want to hear more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. You're a toff.
Musical talk. Well, that was James Lark, the composer of my
favourite show of Edinburgh this year, Miracles at Short Notice. As I've said before, it was a 5-star show, a sophisticated treat. And remember, you can go and see Miracles at Short Notice at the Bedford Theatre on the 15th, 16th and 17th of September, which is later this week. Go along to www.bedfordtheatre.co.uk.
Tomorrow, fantastic.
It's well worth doing. And James is that rare person. He is an intelligent writer with a sense of melody, a sense of lyric and a sense of drama. Put that all together and you get a first-rate show. So, for Musical Talk in 2011, that was our pick of the Fringe. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was our series of shows about the Edinburgh Fringe. Normal service will be resumed next week, with a look at some of the other musicals going on around the country, near you I hope, and of course in London. But what a pleasure it is to be able to talk about shows away from the capital. Thank you for joining me and David over these last few weeks, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. And we finish off today with one final song from our pick of the Fringe, James Lark's Miracles at Short Notice. Goodbye.
How you bore me, Florrie, with those eyes of vacant blue. I'm really rather sorry that I set my eyes on you.
Oh, when I saw you, Florrie, I immediately knew that you'll be very sorry, Florrie, if I ever marry you.
Though I'm easygoing, Florrie, you should know that it is true. I'll have to throw you down a bogey, Florrie, if I marry you.
They say it's love makes the world go round, but I have found it's also true. That's why I was feeling what because my feet stay on the ground. It's the utter loathing that I feel for you.
You'll ask me why I'm looking so bright. I have to tell them it's because you're nowhere in my line of sight. And when I'm feeling blue, what gets me through is the
Utter loathing that I feel for you.
Let's carry on. How about this? What have you got? All the personality and with the Spanish flu display, and the loyalty that no one can stop
Man, your social graces I assume were picked up in the zoo. I want to curl up in a ball while you malinger like a
along with your tendency to smother and relentlessly pursue. I'd sooner marry my own mother than attach myself to you. Hurry up. They say it's love makes the world go round, but I have found it's also true.
That's why we're speeding once and shows my feet stay on the ground. It's the utter loathing that I feel for you.
How about it? I'll charge half shares in royalties and throw in my silences to your guilty
There is
secret.
my credit to you.
And in sheer gratitude, she'd like me to take a much needed holiday for the Adriatic. I should dream of refusing.
And you can dream of letting you.
Let's continue. Ready? Florrie, you're pathetic.
Not bad. I'm done poetic.
Taken aesthetically, you're also very plain.
Your love is uninvited.
And unrequited.
I'd be delighted if we never met again. Though I'm easy-going, Florrie, you should know that it is true. I'll run you. Though in the lorry, Florrie, I marry you. Good sex. People ask me why I'm looking so hard. Tell them it's because you're nowhere in my line of sight. And when I'm feeling blue, what gets me through is the undisputed, never muted, absolute, idiopathic, axiomatic loathing for you.
This episode of Musical Talk presented and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2011, except for the music, where the copyright persists with the original creators. And now for some more Edinburgh Fringe Out Talks.
Sometimes it turns itself off from being an MP3 recorder to being something else, and the problem is everything else fills up the battery, fills up the memory stick.
Yes.
But we
Yeah,
just
my
feel-
one every now and then resets itself to stereo recording, which of course halves the time on it.
This will be slightly more of a review, I suppose. Really, can I have a level, old man?
Yes, certainly. I'll probably be talking about this volume for however long we discuss things.
That's exactly right. Right,
Brilliant.
Okay. Sorry to say this, it's 9:15. Believe it or
Wow,
not.
where did that go?
We have been recording for 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
Truth.
40 minutes.
That's...
So
Where did that go?
I'm actually going to have to go in a minute, and what I'll have to do is ask you to hold over those other 2 shows for our next meeting when we meet in London. Is that
yes.
all right? I'm
Well,
so
unless we manage to find another time while you're still here.
Well,
but,
I'll send you a text.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely. It'd be nice to...
The problem I've got in the interview I've done with Wasted Love is that there was a group behind me rehearsing a dance routine quite loudly, and you picked them up for most of it.
Fair enough. Well, as long as you can hear the words, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
No, I'll be delighted.
It will need a little bit of editing. There's one point actually where a waitress came over and started talking, so I had to stop mid-question and carry on.
Well, feel free to bung it my way.
I will do, because I won't be able to do that for a while.
No, I'm very happy to do that editing. That's lovely.
It's only
if
10
you're happy,
minutes.
I'll include it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
by
I'll
all
include
means.
it. No, I'm
There's
doing around
quite a
3 or
few
so.
bits where I sort of say I'm not sure if I can, if this is going out, or I'm not sure if this will be
I'll take
official
all-
or everything, because
yeah.
I wasn't sure how much of. Bearing in mind I hadn't warned you I was going to do it, I didn't know whether or not I was free to go already.
I'll take out anything that makes you sound anything other than as though it was always intended to happen.
Excellent.
I shall make you shine, boy. I don't know yet whether I'm going to connect this interview with the one we had earlier, with a jingle in the middle, and just say when we met up again later, so I sort of almost dedicate an episode to you and me reviewing, or whether I have them over 2 different episodes. I can put my incredibly old phone down so we can see what our times are.
I'll just make sure mine's off, which
I'm
it
afraid
is.
mine's on, actually, but
No, that's
only
fine.
for the clock. Right, it's fine
That's
too.
fine.
Well, that gives plenty of time.
Well, it's on, it's just silent.
So I'm going to do a greeting for you, but I might cut the greeting out if we go straight through. I'm going to ask you some fairly anodyne questions, I'm afraid. They are going to be, how's it going?
You'll probably
all that
get
kind
quite anodyne answers.
Yeah, fair enough. But it'll all be in the choreography. Anything else you want to add before we go?
No.
I hope that didn't seem too rushed.
No, not in the slightest.